On March 9, 2021, the Hebrew channel I-24 News, based in Tel Aviv, conducted an interview with Prime Minister Netanyahu. During the interview, the anchor asked him a strange question. Is there any hope that we can recover Eli Cohen's body? Netanyahu replied, "We have been trying for 55 years," and mentioned that there were significant negotiations ongoing with the willingness to offer anything to retrieve the body. He expressed happiness that in 2018, the Mossad carried out a quality operation inside Syria, successfully retrieving the watch that Cohen had worn. You might find this information surprising, but allow me to tell you that Eli Cohen has been classified as the most dangerous spy in human history. Today, I will tell you the story of Eli Cohen, the spy who managed to reach the position of the Syrian Prime Minister and whom the Hebrews are still demanding. Imagine that in 2019, indirect negotiations took place between them and the Syrian government, where they offered to give up the occupied Sheba farms, but they wanted to know where Cohen's body was located. So, who is Cohen? Why is he so important to them, and why is he considered the most dangerous spy in history? At the beginning of the 1800s, a Hebrew family named Cohen migrated from the American continent by sea and settled in the northern Levant, specifically in a village near Aleppo called Tatif. The family lived in this village for about 100 years, and by the beginning of the 1900s, many members of this family moved from the north and settled in the city of Aleppo, specifically in the Yamilia neighborhood, where, to this day, streets and houses are registered in their names, and this is officially documented. The important thing is that a young Jewish man named Shaul Cohen decided to get married and move to Egypt. At that time, France was occupying Syria and did not give any consideration to these Hebrews. But Egypt was under British occupation, and the British offered extraordinary opportunities and facilitation to the Hebrews. The Hebrews were a red line for the British, and no one was allowed to approach them. They were allowed to work in professions where no one could compete with them, such as gold and jewelry, spices and condiments, import and export, and trade in goods in general. In other words, the Hebrews monopolized all the profitable and expensive items. The secret rule that all Hebrews adhered to was that no one who wasn't Hebrew could work with them. So, Shaul thought, the job opportunities there must be secure. Let me go to Egypt. It's better than living here. And indeed, on February 15, 1924, Shaul arrived in the Egyptian city of Alexandria. He settled there. His situation was excellent, and things kept improving for him. That same year, specifically on December 26, 1924, he was blessed with a new son, whom he decided to name Eliyahu. This Eliyahu would later become known as Eli Cohen, the hero of our story. The important thing is that Eli lived a life that was 100% Hebrew. His family was extremely religious, to the point of strictness and fanaticism. He was educated in Hebrew schools under the supervision of prominent global rabbis, attended their synagogue daily, and received Talmudic teachings. In short, Eli mastered this field and became deeply rooted in Hebrew culture. In 1942, Eli turned 18 and entered the Faculty of Engineering at King Farouk University in Cairo, Egypt's capital. His life was going smoothly until 1944, when Eli decided to leave the university and pursue another path. The reason was that in that year, the global Zionist movement decided to open a small secret office in the Egyptian province of Alexandria. The office was called the Zionist Youth Organization. Like any young man who grew up with only one idea in mind, that he was Hebrew and that one day his nation would rule this crazy world, he decided to leave the university in Cairo and return to Alexandria. Why? To participate in achieving the dream he had lived for. Of course, to understand how far-fetched their ideas were, one of their beliefs was that when they ruled the world, angels would rain down on them with ready-made clothes from the sky. The organization Eli volunteered for had many activities, such as sabotage within Egypt, Libya, and the Maghreb, as well as recruiting Hebrew youth to join the Hebrew army, which was being formed and prepared to fight the so-called War of God against the Arabs and anyone who stood in the way of their holy mission. At this time, all the Hebrews were migrating to Palestine, including the Cohen family. A significant disagreement arose between Eli and his family, as Eli refused to migrate and stayed in Egypt. This caused major conflicts between him and his father, but eventually the father relented and the Cohen family migrated, leaving Eli behind. Eli remained alone with the organization and entered a new phase with many events. At that time, Eli fully dedicated himself to the organization, living in a shared apartment with other Hebrew youths whose only task was to carry out the office's orders. So, who was Eli's direct manager? It was a man with a code name John Darling, considered the founder of the concept of espionage among the Hebrews and the most dangerous intelligence leader the Mossad has ever known. He was the one who established the Mossad and set the general rules. I'm telling you these details so you understand what kind of student might emerge from under such a teacher. The important thing is that on June 26, 1952, the royal rule in Egypt ended, and the free officers' coup succeeded. The officers began withdrawing from the agreements that the Egyptian king had made with the British and started moving closer to the Soviets. The Soviets were very powerful at that time, and their support was unlimited. Let me tell you something that might shock you, something you may be hearing for the first time in your life. The Hebrews had a goal for all the countries in the region to become loyal to them. They didn't care about the British or the Americans. The important thing is that you were with them. Sure, no one on this planet likes them, but they said, "Come work with us and we'll grow together." This was their rule, and it still is. That's why the Hebrew office in Egypt decided to incite riots and violence in the name of the Egyptian people. These riots were meant to be against the Americans, the British, and the Soviets. Why? To disrupt the relationship between them and Egypt. Indeed, they burned embassies, blew up political and diplomatic embassies, organized large demonstrations, and caused riots. They killed British and American politicians on Egyptian soil. And anything that could have been annoying for Egypt's allies, the office did it. The important thing was that they didn't allow any form of understanding between Egypt or any of its allies, and indeed, the plan was going to succeed 100%. But before the Hebrews reached the stage where they could offer Egypt an alliance, an event occurred that the whole world heard about. Here's what happened. As I told you, the office was responsible for all the riots that were happening, and of course, Eli was one of the volunteers participating in all the operations. As I mentioned, they did everything that caused harm, including planting explosives. Eli was one of the geniuses in this matter. In 1954, one of the young men who was planting explosives with Eli got caught. He was on his way to plant explosives around the British Embassy in Alexandria. The important thing is that after the first slap, he confessed to everything. Names, plans, meetings, activities, everything related to the organization, he confessed. This is when the whole world started talking about the Lavon affair, named after the Hebrew defense minister at that time. If you notice, I'm saying Hebrews to avoid upsetting the folks on YouTube or any other platform. The important thing is that the group, including Cohen, was arrested. After a trial that lasted almost 2 years, 3 of them were sentenced to death and the rest were imprisoned for 15 years. However, Eli and a girl who worked with them were released and acquitted. If you search all the sources on this planet, to this day, no one knows why Eli was acquitted. He confessed to participating in an operation in which 8 Englishmen were killed. Why was he acquitted? To this day, no one knows. So, Eli was released and traveled to Israel in 1955. He went there thinking he was a national hero with a record full of achievements and that this would earn him a prestigious job when he arrived. However, the Mossad told him to get lost, saying they had no use for him. The reason was that the cell that had been caught in the Lavon affair had become famous, and someone like him would harm them rather than benefit them. So, he decided to return to Egypt, hoping to find work there. He went back to Egypt and worked in a gold shop, living with 3 other Hebrew youths in a shared house. In 1956, the tripartite aggression against Egypt occurred. As a result, Eli and his companions were arrested without any reason, but after his innocence was proven, they released him from prison. He then pulled himself together and returned to Israel, where he got a job as an accountant in an agricultural machinery company. The most remarkable thing about them is that they aren't just thieves who steal land and farm it, but they do it with a brazenness you wouldn't believe. You've all seen the enthusiastic applause for welcoming Netanyahu. The important thing is that Eli married a Hebrew Iraqi woman named Nadia and continued his life peacefully until 1958. The situation in Israel was very unstable, with attacks from outside and a stone uprising from within. The Syrian Golan, as a geographical location, was above Israel, meaning that from this area, one could easily strike any location inside Israel. So, Israel tried in every way possible to recruit spies inside Syria and Lebanon, but they failed. Everyone they recruited was caught, and none of them were well trained in Tel Aviv, nor did any of them have practical experience in this field. So, they devised a 5-year plan to recruit someone from within. Someone who was raised by them, and at the same time, of Syrian origin. And who do you think was ready for such a mission? Bravo, Eli Cohen. The funny thing is that sources confirm that the Mossad had placed Eli Cohen at the bottom of the candidate list. Before he was even nominated for this mission, he was excluded from any plan or work they wanted to carry out. They had excluded him for several reasons, among them that this guy was considered unlucky, cursed even. They said, "We don't want him involved in anything." But fate decided that he would be the only suitable candidate for this operation. The reason was that his features were Arabic, and he was naturally fluent in the Arabic dialect, particularly the Syrian accent, and his parents were originally Syrian and held Syrian IDs. The most important thing was that he had, at one point, trained in Egypt under the best Hebrew instructor they had ever known, John Darling. By their standards, there was no one better than him. The important thing is that the Mossad contacted Eli and asked him to quit his job and start preparing for the new phase. Eli underwent 2 full years of training on transmission devices, signal sending methods, espionage tricks and deceptions, and many other long-winded stories. As for language and communication, he trained again on this and mastered the Syrian dialect in detail. He trained on things like authentic Syrian customs and traditions, memorized the streets of Damascus and Aleppo as if he walked them every day. Some sources confirm that Eli reached a level where he could wander the streets of Damascus and Aleppo entirely without a map, walking on foot, and, most importantly, without asking anyone in the street how to get anywhere. This, despite the fact that he had never seen these places before, but he memorized the map by heart. He also memorized proverbs, customs, traditions, situations, and fabricated scenarios to practice, and he memorized Syrian history by heart. Most importantly, he identified the people he was going to target, making it impossible for anyone to know that he wasn't actually Syrian. The training continued for 2 years, after which he was ready to execute the plan. Now I need you to focus and wake up, because here the real story of Eli Cohen begins. What happened was that the officer responsible for training Cohen contacted him and told him to come to his office, because it was time to execute the plan. Eli entered the officer's office and underwent several tests, such as being asked what caught his attention in the waiting room before entering, and what he noticed about the way the officer greeted him. These were things that required extreme focus. Of course, the officer wanted to make sure that Cohen had mastered the science of espionage in all its details. The important thing is that after these tests, the officer gave Cohen a large envelope containing all the information about his new identity. His name was to be Kamel Amin Tabet, The envelope he was given contained all the official documents, including a forged Argentine passport and official documents with the details of a Syrian businessman named Kamel Amin Tabet. All these documents confirmed that Eli was a young Syrian who was born and raised in Argentina, and so the plan began to be executed. So, Eli assumed the identity of Kamel Amin Tabet, a Syrian-born young man who lived in Argentina. The plan was set in motion on February 1st, 1961. On this date, Kamel Amin Tabet boarded a plane and flew to Switzerland. There, they gave him forged papers, including a document for transferring ownership of an inheritance left to him by his uncle, who had supposedly died in Argentina. These documents stated that Kamel was the sole heir of his Syrian uncle who had lived in Argentina. Everything was meticulously planned and studied. He took the papers and went to Argentina, where he immediately began learning Spanish, the official language, and familiarized himself with the customs and traditions there. After 5 months, he began executing the plan. He started appearing at every Arab gathering and began getting to know influential Arabs in Argentina. Because of his influence, wealth, and affluence, he became popular with everyone and quickly became one of the most prominent Arab figures there. Within just 3 months, Eli Cohen, or as we called him, Kamel Amin Tabet, became the head of the Syrian community in Argentina, reaching the highest honorary position any expatriate could achieve. Before the end of 1961, during a casual meeting with the Syrian community there, someone suggested that he return to Syria and start projects there because the homeland needed him. At that time, Eli sent a telegram to the Mossad saying that what they had dreamed of happening in years had occurred within 6 months. Of course, this is documented in the sources and letters that Eli Cohen sent to the Mossad's office in Switzerland, and these documents are still available. The important thing is that Eli wasted no time, and on December 24, 1961, he returned to the homeland. The man longed to smell the scent of the homeland's soil. But how did he return? He flew to Switzerland, then from Switzerland to Israel, where he received the files for the second part of the plan. He then returned to Switzerland, from there to Lebanon, and finally entered Syria by land in a private car. Why did he enter Syria by land? Because he was carrying a complete espionage kit, a Morse code cipher machine and cameras. Some sources say that he brought in 2 large transport vehicles, one filled with equipment and the other with money. From that moment on, Eli began swimming in a sea of traitors because the person who allowed these vehicles to enter Syria was a Syrian officer. He transported the vehicle, or vehicles, to Eli's residence, and the person who helped him install the devices was also Syrian, though he didn't know what they were, so let's not blame the man. The important thing is that Eli, or Kamel Amin Tabet, opened an import-and-export company dealing in furniture and furnishings with a particular focus on Damascus furniture. He opened an export line to Europe, aiming for Europeans to become acquainted with Arab culture through these products. He would say that his company was a national duty more than a commercial activity. Of course, what no one knew was that Eli was sending photographs of Syrian neighborhoods and streets hidden inside the furniture. At first, he was only required to photograph public places, but then the task evolved. He started getting acquainted with officers and members of the police and the military who helped him photograph military areas and security locations, all in exchange for money. The merchant who bought everything Kamel sent to Switzerland was another Mossad agent stationed there. Cohen's famous line in front of people was, "Our designs are receiving great popularity in the European market." What's funny? A furniture trader from the city of Aleppo went on a trip to Europe to check whether the European market really needed such products or not. He wanted to open a line just like Kamel's. However, every exhibition and establishment he offered the Syrian designs to rejected them. One of the European traders told him, "What is this furniture? It's outdated, like something old." This trader returned to Syria and requested a meeting with Kamel. He told him, "I want to partner with you and open a joint business line." But Cohen evaded him and refused, saying, "I don't want to partner with anyone." Of course, he said this purely from the standpoint of monopoly and competition. Now, let me tell you the heavy stuff. Did you know that Cohen got to know a low-ranking officer at that time named Moaz Zar-Edin? This officer was the nephew of the chief of staff of the Syrian army. With a little money, this officer allowed Cohen to personally photograph everything: artillery, tanks, missiles, sophisticated weapons, laboratories, and scientific research facilities in Syria's defense industries. The most important thing he photographed was the Russian T-54 tanks, both inside and out. As simple as it was, whenever the Mossad received photos from Cohen, they would ask him to take another shot from a different angle, or photograph a specific small part. Why was it so easy for him? Because Cohen would simply ask Zar-Edin, and Zar-Edin would make the way clear for him. For a little money, he would arrange for Cohen to have a full photo session with a tank. "Do whatever you want," he'd say. This caused the Syrian army to lose more than one battle, to the point that today, there is a Syrian tank graveyard in the Golan Heights and Quneitra, and to this day, the Hebrews celebrate this day, the day they destroyed more than 300 tanks, each one taken out with a single missile. Did things stop there? Definitely not. Eli got to know the chief of staff, and needless to say, was very generous with him and many others, paying them off. He joined the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party and participated in a coup that took place in Syria. He was the leader of a full civilian plan to ensure the success of the coup without any fuss, and he was involved in many activities. All these things happened in just 2 years. Cohen managed to reach every place he wanted to, leaving no military matter unreported and unsent. Of course, he was leaking information through a Morse code device. Beyond all this, he managed to get close to influential Syrian figures, more than 165 people, getting to know all the leaders of that time. Naturally, a question might come to your mind. How did Kamel Amin-Tabet become so famous in Syria? And how did no one discover that he was the same Cohen who had been arrested in Egypt? The matter, simply put, was that his appearance had changed significantly. In Egypt, he was a young man in his early 20s, while in Syria, he was nearly 40. More importantly, the Hebrews had withdrawn all the photos of him and the girl who was with him when they were imprisoned in Egypt. They pulled their pictures from all newspapers and official documents in Egypt. Of course, they did this in hope that one day they might need this man, and indeed, the day came when they needed him, and they used him in Syria. According to Mossad documents, Cohen exceeded the mission's requirements in both goal and timing. Even Israel itself never imagined that Cohen could obtain all this information. With his intelligence, Cohen managed to completely infiltrate the military at that time. The most important thing is that he accomplished the mission in record time. However, every story has an end, and after all the success he achieved, Cohen had to be exposed. What happened was that Cohen was among the leaders who planned and helped Amin al-Hafiz come to power. One of the humorous sayings that spread from Amin al-Hafiz at that time was, "Kamel Amin-Tabet and I are both from Aleppo, so we understand each other." Imagine how convincing Cohen was. The important thing is that the coup happened, and in 1963, Amin al-Hafiz became the president of Syria. However, over the next 2 years, everyone abandoned Amin al-Hafiz because he dealt with all his opponents harshly and brutally. Yet there was one person who never abandoned him and stayed by his side: Kamel Amin-Tabet. So, how was he exposed? How was he caught? What happened was that the Indian embassy in Syria sent a report to the Syrian General Intelligence saying that a Morse code signal was coming from the Abu Ramana neighborhood in Damascus. This was a residential area and considered one of the most upscale neighborhoods in Syria at the time. It was highly unlikely that anyone would think a signal could come from such a neighborhood. Who would buy such a device and place it in that area? The Syrian leadership didn't give the report much importance, but the Indian embassy sent a second telegram confirming to the intelligence that the issue had recurred and that a more signal was indeed coming from the Abu Ramana neighborhood. The leadership then took the matter seriously and contacted the Soviets, who in turn sent them a device that could detect these strange signals. Only 5 officers knew about this device, and they were the ones assigned to search for the more signals coming from Abu Ramana. As soon as they activated the device, they could detect these signals. They caught 3 officers who were directly dealing with Israel. The important thing is that they put the detection device in a car, and the car kept driving around the Abu Ramana neighborhood. They searched for 3 days until the time came when the device caught a signal Cohen was sending to the Mossad. This happened on May 24, 1965. One of the intelligence officers caught the signal, and they followed it until they reached the door of Kamil Amentabet's house. They broke down the door and caught him red-handed. The officers who arrested him were so shocked that on the same day, news of Kamil's arrest spread. And of course, the story of tracking the signal didn't remain secret. I mean, if he turned out to be a traitor, there was no need to hide the matter of the detection device, because Kamil was the last person anyone would have suspected to be a traitor. Imagine that at the time his betrayal was uncovered, he was preparing to become the new prime minister, and the decision to appoint him as prime minister was supposed to be implemented 3 days after his arrest. They caught him 3 days before he was to become prime minister. Even the message he was sending was informing the Mossad of his appointment, but his joy was short-lived. After Cohen was arrested, there was no room for negotiation or pardon, and the reason was that he was a close friend of President Amin al-Hafiz. So, there was no need for further discussion, and it was impossible for Amin al-Hafiz to allow his extradition to Israel or to make a deal with Israel for him, even though the documents and sources documenting the negotiations between Israel and the Syrian leadership mention that the offers presented to Hafiz were impossible for any human to refuse. However, for him, the matter was personal. His friend had betrayed him and the country. He ordered that Cohen be sentenced to death, regardless of any law and without consideration for any court ruling in the world. Indeed, they put Cohen in a mock trial in front of the public, and the death sentence was issued 4 days after his arrest. The sentence was on May 8, 1965. Of course, some sources say that Amin al-Hafiz's decision to execute Cohen so quickly was to close the chapter on all the secrets and scandals associated with it, because if an investigation had been conducted, it would have uncovered scandals that would have led to the execution of Cohen and 1,000 others along with him. Of course, this is just an opinion and what some sources say, but we can only say that his patriotism was what led him to execute Cohen. On May 18, 1965, Cohen was executed in front of the entire world in the Marja Square in Damascus. He remained hanging on the gallows for 8 hours in front of everyone, after which they buried him in a secret location that, to this day, no one knows. It's said that the Syrian government asked 3 nomadic Bedouins to bury him on the road to Homs, near the ancient city of Palmyra, in a place no one knows. It's also said that after they buried him, they were executed to ensure that this man's name would be completely erased, with no chance of recovery, and so that Israel wouldn't be able to reach any traitor who could tell them where his body was. Even though Cohen was dead, in 1967, all the information he had leaked bore fruit during the Six-Day War, enabling Israel to occupy Quneitra and the Golan Heights and to seize almost all of the Syrian army's equipment. Eshkol Moshe Dayan, who served as Prime Minister and Minister of Defense in 1967, said that without Eli Cohen, they would not have achieved this overwhelming victory over the Syrians. Of course, in 2011, the Hebrew newspaper Haaretz reported that the Syrian government was still holding Cohen's body, and negotiations over it were ongoing to this day.